As the newly elected president meets with world leaders, repression continues in Egypt. President Mohamed Morsi vowed he would release all political prisoners who were tried through military courts. However, it's been 2 weeks since the president moved into the palace behind me, and Egyptians are still being detained and tried through military courts. These young friends are the latest victims. Islam, Karim, and Mohammed, members of the Liberal Democratic Party, were detained by the army after leaving a protest against the military drafting the constitution. Their mothers, fully aware of what happens to those who are taken, are grief-stricken.
ده اللي اتسحل في الشوارع وقعد عشان الثوره ونام في الشوارع واتمرمط واتبهدل عشان الثوره والاخر يتعمل فيه كده. ده كان واخد رصاصه في رجله ليه؟ حرام عليهم منهم لله والله العظيم 3 منهم لله. فوضت عليك الامر يا صاحب الامر خلاص كفايه. كفايه.
While Mohammed waited in the street, U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton met with top Egyptian officials. The plight of thousands of detainees sentenced in military tribunals was not on the agenda. A decade ago, Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi was in prison. The U.S. government was financing the military regime that put him there. This is the first visit of an American government official to Egypt after the election of President Mohamed Morsi. Prior to her trip, we've been seeing a number of reports that she's coming here specifically to discuss the Camp David Treaty between Egypt and Israel in 1979. Now, why is this important to the United States? Because Egypt has been one of the top recipients of American aid, specifically in the military arena, because of the Camp David Accords. And a lot of U.S. lawmakers are saying unless Mohamed Morsi continues the peace agreement unhindered as it is, they do not want that military aid to come to this country. In a press conference after the meeting, Clinton showed no regret for the U.S. government's support of ousted dictator Hosni Mubarak.
We worked with the government of the country at the time. We work with governments around the world. We agree with some of them. We disagree with others of them.
The vague remarks were unsurprising. The U.S. has long been wary of the Muslim Brotherhood while working closely with Egypt's military and intelligence apparatus. Clinton's visit comes at a time when the newly elected president is trying, unsuccessfully so far, to wrest power from the ruling military junta. Few question that the U.S. government's support for democracy and human rights in Egypt is overshadowed by one overriding foreign policy goal.
More than 3 decades ago, Egypt and Israel signed a treaty that has allowed a generation to grow up without knowing war, and we certainly support the continuation of the peace agreement.
Egypt's ruling military junta has undermined the transition to civilian rule, dissolving the parliament, seizing legislative powers, and assuming control of the process of drafting a new constitution. But Clinton had nothing but praise for the military generals.
We have commended the SCAF for representing the Egyptian people in the revolution, as compared to what we're seeing in Syria, which is the military murdering their own people. The SCAF here protected the Egyptian nation.
Not all Egyptians would agree.
الجيش بيقتل فينا يا ممدوح يا ممدوح انت الجيش بيقتل فينا موتنا في الخيام يا ممدوح.
State-sponsored violence and repression has only increased since the military junta took over from Mubarak a year and a half ago. Hundreds have been killed, thousands injured, and over 12,000 imprisoned by military tribunals. Human rights organizations call them the regime's political prisoners. None of these subjects were mentioned at the press conference, either by Clinton or the journalists. A State Department official from Clinton's entourage allowed 2 journalists to ask questions. Both had accompanied Clinton from Washington. The 2 Egyptian journalists allowed to ask questions were from state television, known for their pro-military bias. TRN's repeated attempts to ask a question were ignored.
Secretary Clinton, just answer, why did the U.S. release $1.3 billion military aid to the generals? What does that say to Egyptian democracy?
This is great evidence of a free press, which is part of democracy.
You just released $1.3 billion to the military generals who are still killing Egyptian people during peaceful demonstrations. Ma'am, why did they release that money?
On Sunday, Hillary Clinton met with the ruling military generals. Egypt's top general, Mohammed Hossein Tantawi, later told reporters the military would not let a certain group dominate the country. The message seemed to be directed at President Morsi and his Muslim Brotherhood, justifying the military takeover of legislative powers.
على طول احنا طول عمرنا شعب بنقاتل الامريكان انما احنا بعد كده مش هنقول حاجه للامريكان بعد كده الامريكان كلهم تحت جزمتنا.
Protests against Clinton's visit took place throughout the weekend. While Clinton attended a diplomatic ceremony for the opening of a U.S. consulate in the seaside city of Alexandria, Egyptians hurled rocks, shoes, and tomatoes at her caravan. During the meeting, a silent vigil for Egyptians recently detained and awaiting military trials lined the sidewalk outside the presidential palace. For many here, Clinton's visit means nothing to their struggle against the military.
وإلا نبقى كذابين، ما نعرفش نعمل عدالة اجتماعية.
As Clinton heads to Israel for the last leg of her international tour, Egyptians recently detained by the army await their military trials. Jehan Hafiz for The Real News, Cairo, Egypt.